Okay, it's 2 o'clock. Let's start. Welcome this next session of Surf Research Week, the gold of the 21st century. Just one quick house rule. If you have any questions, put them in the chat, and then we'll try to answer them. Or I will let you ask the question yourself. Okay. In short, we have two guests today, Henne Holstege and Swinbank. Welcome. I will do a short introduction later. I will have a very brief introduction about surf services they're using, and then we'll go to them. So I will start with sharing my presentation. So I hope this shows all right. I'm looking at they're not showing?
It looks good at home here.
Okay, okay. Looks good. All right then. Okay. Of course, the gold of the 21st century is not the Bitcoin, but data. Data.
I'm sorry, look here. There's Henne. That wasn't in the session.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Then we'll go on. Where was I? Oh yeah. Of course, data by itself is not useful. But through data combination, processing, and analysis, researchers can obtain new insights. And here I have an overview of the surf compute and storage services. So on the left, you see SRC, that Surf Research Cloud, is a kind of a bridge between the surf services and the commercial public providers. And well, Surf provides an ecosystem ranging from commercial services to dedicated virtual machines, custom services, and scalable compute platforms. And if you see from left to right, left are the services, and the services are in red, aimed at smaller applications. And as we move to the right, you get the services for larger scalable platforms like Spider Grid, and completely to the right is Snellius, and next to Snellius are all the storage services we offer. But today we're going to talk about the gold, and that's about large data processing services. So I've highlighted Spider and Grid. Henne is using Spider, and John and I have to say ASTRON are using Spider and Grid. And they're typically processing suitable for large data processing. So I put some numbers here in the slide that we're doing 200 petabytes a year at Surf at these platforms, and we store at least 100 petabytes. And if you have any questions about compute, I have some information here. You can go to SurfNL or our service desk, or send me or my colleague Raymond, who will be in the chat, a question. Okay. Then I will introduce the first guest. Henne Holstege. She's an associate professor at the Department of Human Genetics at the Amsterdam University Medical Center, where she runs an independent research section, Genomics of Neurodegenerative, tonguebreaker, diseases and aging. She's a staff member of the Amsterdam Alzheimer's Center, and to learn how cognitive health can be maintained during aging, she set up the 100+ study cohort study of cognitively healthy centenarians. And the main focus of her lab lies on the identification of novel genetic determinants underlying Alzheimer's disease and the escape of Alzheimer's disease. Henne, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yes, Henne, before I give you the floor, I have one question. We're talking about the gold. How much gold do you have stored at SURF?
In terms of well, storage, we have 2 petabytes of data, almost 2 petabytes of data of genetic data there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot. So, please, would you tell us some more about what you're doing with this data?
Yes. Okay. Let me share my slides. Here we go. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, so I'll be talking about the Alzheimer's Genetics Hub. And I put a European and an American flag here because I want to show that we would like to collaborate between these 2 different continents. So I would like to show you first why I am doing this. Because this is what happens with Alzheimer's disease. Basically, the brain becomes very small and their holes start to appear. So this is the process that happens with Alzheimer's disease. So the only thing that you can really do to only cure actually that there exists is if you prevent this from happening. And one of the things that we have enhanced to do this, or in future, is the genome, because 60 to 80% of this process happening is genetically defined. However, many of the genes are not yet known. So genetics gives insight in Alzheimer's disease because the associated genes give insight in the etiology. And if we know how genes translate into proteins, so we would like to do some intervention strategies based on those proteins that are highly unique per individual. So, but we can also use the genome, since we're born with our genome, to determine Alzheimer's disease risk before disease onset. So that we can already know who is vulnerable and how is a person vulnerable, so that we can try to maintain that brain health depending on a personalized risk. So therefore, lots of people are interested in identifying the heritability associated with Alzheimer's disease. And there are 3 ways of doing that. We can look into pedigrees of affected families, so in which the disease inherits from parent to child, but those are extremely rare disease. And we identified 3 genes that were associated with Alzheimer's disease risk. But we know that there are many, many more. Then there's also, we can also use genotyping markers. So all of the DNA has specific markers, and we can identify which part of the DNA is more often present in people with Alzheimer's disease than people without Alzheimer's disease, so that we can see which genetic regions should we focus on. However, those genetic regions do not show any causality, so that is just a proxy for what we really need to know. And recently, we can also do genetic sequencing. So we really read part of the DNA so that we can identify which genetic variants are more common in individuals with Alzheimer's disease than without Alzheimer's disease. So identification of the causal genetic variants. And this is what we're doing here at SURF. So just a quick explanation. This is a piece of DNA, and this piece of DNA codes for a nose with a shape like this. However, if this A would turn into a G molecule, then perhaps the nose would look like this. And this is really what can occur. So only a single molecule change can already have a very large effect, and it can also have a very large effect on the vulnerability for Alzheimer's disease. So the problem now is that there's 3 billion of these molecules, so 3 billion, and you inherit a set from both parents. So in total, we're looking at 6 billion molecules, and which of these are actually associated with Alzheimer's disease? So we're looking at 3 gigabase pairs is what we call it. So we're looking at a very complex problem, and that's why, of course, we need to have large compute. We're looking at a needle in a haystack, and not 1, not 2, but very many different needles in this haystack, and some of them have a very large effect on the disease risk, and others will have a much smaller effect. And together, this constellation of genetic variants defines your unique vulnerability for Alzheimer's disease. Now, of course, the variants with a very large effect are already known, but especially the ones with a smaller effect, or those that are extremely rare, are not yet known. So to identify more of these genes, we have to compare people who are demented with people who are non-demented. And given the complexity, this entails tens or hundreds of thousands of individuals that we have to compare their genomes from. So therefore, collaboration is a must. Now, collaboration is a bit difficult sometimes because people tend to, want to stick to their own data set. Sharing can sometimes be a bit of a decision to take. However, we are now more and more understanding that if we do not collaborate, across the whole world, then we are not going to be able to identify more of these genes. So in 2016, we here in Amsterdam and Rotterdam were the first to really combine their data sets. And we focused only on one specific gene, and we already knew this gene because it was identified in one of those pedigrees. We identified 640 Alzheimer's disease patients and compared them with more than 1,200 non-demented controls. And we did this on SERV. At that time, it was Cartesius. And we were able to identify genetic variants in the SORL1 gene that associated with Alzheimer's disease. So this was only one gene, but we did show that it is super complex, but we can do it. And this was actually the start of what happened next, because then we wanted to expand this analysis to the whole genome. And we knew that in the United States, there was the ADSP consortium, so the Alzheimer's disease sequencing project in the US, who actually had more than 11,000 genomes available, which we were able to download to the Netherlands, where we were able to merge them with our 5,000 genomes that we had here. And we're also part of the Alzheimer's disease European sequencing consortium. So then we said that, so we have all of this on the Netherlands data and the US data on the Cartesius supercomputer. And after that, the UK joined with a couple, and Spain joined, and France joined, and Germany joined, and the UK joined again, another part of the UK joined. And at one point we had almost 26,000 genomes on one server, so that we could actually harmonize the data, which is extremely important. Otherwise, you're going to only be stuck with rare variants that are false positives. And then we can apply one pipeline. And in the first findings, we did identify 3 new genes this way. So these were the parties that were involved. And so we had to replicate our findings, and we now have more than 53,000 genomes on this server. And this actually, we have been able to generate a paper, which is now accepted in Nature Genetics. But we have these 47,000 genomes that are used here. But on the server, we have these 53,000 genomes. And so we identified two genes, and we have compelling evidence for a third. But we do see that there's a lot more to come. We see that are just sub-threshold significant, and it's really important to get more of these genes out there so that we can actually analyze them and look at what their function is. So we need an incentive and a means to collaborate internationally. However, there is a hiccup. Because while so in the United States there is 27,000 genomes, it's actually more by now, which we were able to use to download and combine with the 26,000 that we have now here in Europe. But of course, the people from the United States would also really like to look into those 26,000 genomes that we have here in Europe. However, this is not possible because of the General Data Protection Regulation, which makes it impossible for us in Europe to share the data with the US because they have different privacy regulations. And this, of course, causes a bit of unevenness in the field, which is actually really unwanted. So what is the GDPR? So what we have to do is we have to ask proper consent to a person who's actually going to donate their DNA for such an experiment, and for such a case control experiment. And we also have to put the data on a server where the proper data safety measures have been taken. So this, as a consequence, this has led to the difficulty of sharing genetic data with the US due consider different privacy regulations. So we thought, well, if we cannot bring the data to the researchers, why don't we bring the researchers to the data? And actually, in 2021, last year, there was a second part of this law implemented called TREMS 2, which basically says touching the data from outside of the EU is the same thing as downloading it. So there is a lot of things that we need to take care of to make sure that we will be able to share this data by bringing the researchers to the data. What we were thinking of is, since we have this now here in Amsterdam, why don't we see if we can make it work? So we would have a part of all the data would be brought to the supercomputer, and we would merge the data, and then we perform the QC and so quality control on the merged data, and we make the merged data available on Spider. And then we would make Spider in such a way that people from the US could touch the data there, and also the people, of course, from the ADES, so the European Consortium. So therefore, making things a lot more even. So this is what we've been trying to do. So what we want to do is we want to provide the merged data sets, which is 1 to 2 petabytes of raw data. It's going really fast at the moment. We want to provide storage, and we want to provide compute. We want to provide collaboration opportunities on the server, while making sure that those who provide the data remain in complete control of their data sets. So we have to make sure that it's not possible to download genetic data, but of course we have to enable access, because otherwise, if you do all sorts of analysis on the server, then or on Spider, then you want to, of course, download your results to generate figures and summary statistics. So this means that we have to generate a well thought about a hub. So this is what we decided to do. So this is a timeline that what happened is that in 2018, people from the US said, listen, this is uneven. This led to a white paper, and we decided to actually start doing this, start generating this hub. And then in November of 2019, we did a privacy impact assessment and a confidentiality, integrity, and availability analysis on how should we design this hub. Then we got finances in. From the Dutch National Science Council, we were able to get a large grant for compute hours, but also to implement and use the hub, also have access to serve personnel. And this is Kristen Lutz, Raymond Ook, and Koen Schrijver, who we are now collaborating with to set up this hub. And then in April of 2021, we got a second grant for personnel, so 1 FTE to help with the infrastructure of the hub, and also a personnel to help with the legal, because legal is something that is really, really important here. So then with this group, we started to design the hub in April of 2021, and we started to implement the hub in the autumn of last year. So we hope that in this summer we can launch a pilot using non-privacy sensitive data, but the current bottleneck still is now that there's legal agreements that we need to ensure are all right. So Spider, here we want to, indeed we want to bring the analysts to the data. We want to make sure that they have so they have to get approval from each specific cohort to make sure that people still own their own data. People will get their own home directory, and they will get access on that home directory to the data for which they have approval. Then we want to provide storage. It will depend, I think, a lot on what type of research question a user will ask, what we will make available. And the compute capacity we're thinking about several nodes, but also that is very dependable on what the person needs to do. We will monitor usage so that we can adapt according to what is necessary. Well, then of course we need to make sure that the genetic data, which is GDPR sensitive, cannot be copied away from the hub. So we will copy files. So what we will do is we will copy the files to a specific part of the hub, and we will actually log those files so that we can see who is actually downloading what. So the maximum file size that can be downloaded is about 20 gigabytes, while the a whole genome is actually like around a terabyte. So then we can at least identify who caused a data leak if something like that might happen. So this is actually the hub. So the raw sequencing data is uploaded to the hub, and here we do the data processing at the Snellius computer. But then this is the hub itself, and here is where a user can actually do their data analysis. So here we do the pre-processing, and we provide all the data that has been run over a pipeline that harmonizes everything, so that we're not looking at false positive data. Then a person can actually come to a data transfer node, so that the data from here can be transferred here, and that can then be downloaded by the user, so that it can be used for example, the generation of figures for a publication. But the user can also upload, for example, specific algorithms that they want to apply to their data, so that they can also use that here in the hub. So everything has been, with every possible way to apply the necessary security has been applied here on the hub. So that it is as safe as possible and will be allowed to use it. It will have to be GDPR proof, and so that the privacy officers from at least Amsterdam UMC will allow us to use this hub and share the data. Here you can see the level of safety mechanisms here. I think one of the most important things are the legal agreements. So we will ask a user to say that they will not download data. And then of course we have the firewall and also the download logging, and everything is according to the newest regulations. So we hope that this will actually bring together the researchers, the Alzheimer genetics researchers from across the world, so that this will be an incentive to actually share the data and also analyze the data together, so that we can really progress the Alzheimer field this way. So here we see the plan for the coming months. We're currently finalizing the design of the legal documents. This is something that has taken a lot of time. And so we're going to share these legal documents with the interested users, so that when they do want to come to the hub, this has been taken care of, and then they can actually use it. And then here we want to start a proof of concept phase here at the VUMC with non-sensitive data, and around July or somewhere in the summer, we want to invite trusted other users to test whether everything works. And with getting on the hub. And then, here we want to implement also the research drive, which is actually the part that we are using to log the data that is being downloaded. And then, so we hope that in October, we can start to invite other users to see, if it does work, then we really want to get things started. So with that, I think it's very important to say that this is really a collaboration between SURF and Amsterdam UMC. So Kristen, Raymond, and Koen Schrijver, we've been seeing each other for I think more than a year now, almost weekly. And Mark is really the person that is being able to is a really great help here. He's very important for the hub design. And we just hired Georgie, who is going to be helping with the infrastructure, maintaining the infrastructure of the hub, but also if people come to the hub, that he will be able to help those for whom this is new, so that we can really show that it is not something that we're doing for ourselves. We really want to share the data, so that Georgie is there to help those who need help. with this. Now we're also looking for legal support. So if you know anybody who would be interested in helping us with this endeavor and do some legal support here, then please let us know. We have a position available. So with that, I would like to end.
Yes, thank you, Henne. I will have a little time. I think for questions, and I'm looking at the chat, and there are no questions, but I think we have to move on to John, because I'm looking at the time.
Oh, I'm seeing a little bit late here.
One quick question, and then we go to let's see. Let's take the question from Manuel. Henne, do you see the question? Do the GDPR also apply to data? Whoa, that's too small to read. Do data?
No,
maybe Manuel, you can ask the question yourself.
Yeah, so does the GDPR also apply to data derivatives? So like summary statistics and things like that, graphs of tables? No, it does not. The GDPR really is implemented to, if you can identify a person, so the genome is basically the same thing as your picture, your social security number, your address, everything like that. And so because your genome is extremely unique. So if you take away that uniqueness, for example, in summary statistics or in a table, then you cannot go back to that person and say, listen, this was actually you. So this is not GDPR sensitive. And this is why we will allow people to download summary statistics off the hubs, because basically they're not GDPR sensitive.
Okay. Well, Henne, thank you. And maybe if there are some questions for Henne can answer them in the chat, because I'm now going to John. So thank you, Henne.
Thank you.
John, the title of your presentation is Taming the Astronomical Deluge. Practice that word. A quick introduction. John is the Science Data Center Program Manager at ASTRON, where he is developing techniques and services to make data from cutting-edge radio telescopes available to the widest possible community in the most scientifically productive way possible. Before joining ASTRON, he helped manage construction of the Vera Rubin Observatory and was a professor at Seattle's University of Washington. And he has worked on the development of rapid astronomical transient alert systems and contributed to a range of open source astronomical software. Okay, John, the same question, and welcome, by the way. And the same question as I asked Henne, how much gold do you have stored at SURF?
So I believe that at the moment we have upwards of 30 petabytes. But as I'm about to tell you about the ways in which we can make that much more over the next year.
Okay, yeah. So the floor is yours, John. Go ahead.
Awesome, thank you. So first of all, let's check. If I do that, are you seeing my slides?
I'm seeing your slides.
Excellent, great. All right, so thank you for the introduction. I'm going to start by saying thank you to Henne. I think that was a really cool talk. I have a lot to live up to now, so that was really fascinating. So as advertised, I'm going to tell you something about how we're dealing with astronomical data deluge. I nearly called this surfing the astronomical data deluge, and then I thought maybe that was a little bit too much on the nose. So astronomy. When we talk about astronomy, what we're really interested in is understanding the physics, the processes that go on to make the universe the way the universe is. But unfortunately, except for kind of the really local solar system, we can't go out and visit and do experiments and kind of poke things. All we can do is look at the radiation and occasionally the other types of messengers that we receive from astronomical objects. And so when you look at the Milky Way, our galaxy, in optical wavelengths, so the kind of light you might see with your eyes, you see something that looks like this. And that's already pretty informative. I mean, astronomers can get a lot of information out of this, can make a lot of interesting measurements. But of course, you realize that the visible wavelengths are only a small part of the picture. And we can also observe the Milky Way in gamma rays, X-rays, microwaves, radio waves, etc. And when we do that, it actually looks quite different. So this is looking at the Milky Way in radio. And if I flick back and forth between those two images, I have to work out how to flick back and forth, there we go. You can see there's a lot of similarities. I mean, you see a sort of horizontal line across the middle of the image, but you also see a lot of differences. I mean, there are things that are bright in radio that aren't bright in optical. There are dust clouds across the center of the galaxy in optical that you don't see in radio. And really, there's a lot of different structures there. And to really understand the physics that's going on behind all this stuff, we want to see it in as many different wavelengths as possible, so we can build up the most complete picture, capture as much information as we can about the structure and the processes behind all the things that we're looking at. So, of course, one of the challenges is that we have to build devices that can actually observe these things. And you'll have be aware that many of these telescopes end up in space. The atmosphere is unfortunately opaque for many different types of radiation. So gamma rays, X-rays, ultraviolet, etc., are observed from space telescopes, and you'll have seen probably in the news over the last month something about the James Webb Space Telescope that was launched at the end of last year. But in the visible light, so what you see with your eyes, we can obviously observe that from Earth. The atmosphere is transparent at those wavelengths, which is just as well for our vision. But also at radio wavelengths, the Earth's atmosphere is transparent, which is great because it means we can build our radio telescopes on the Earth's surface. And when we're building a telescope, what we really want to do is we want to be able to observe the fine details on the objects that we're interested in. So we're looking to see the smallest possible things, where we're basically, when this kind of idea of angular resolution, we're aiming to make that number as small as possible. But the trouble with that is that as the wavelength of the radiation we're observing increases, so our angular resolution gets worse. So when we're looking at radio wavelengths with maybe a wavelength of 10 meters or so, a small telescope has a really terrible angular resolution. But we can compensate for that by building a really big telescope. The bigger we make our telescopes, the finer the angular details that we can resolve on whatever it is that we're looking at. So what you do is you take this, and the radio astronomer says, well, I will attempt to address this by building a really big telescope. So you end up with something like this. This is the Dwingle telescope. It is right by our institute at ASTRON. It's in the middle of a national park, well worth a visit should you get a chance. And this is a 25-meter radio telescope, so it's a pretty serious device and actually an important piece of the Dutch scientific heritage. And it's great, but then you go, well, we can do better than 25 meters. So you end up building even bigger dishes. This is the Effelsberg telescope in Germany. This is a 100-meter dish. And as you can start to see, there's sort of really serious sort of civil engineering going on here. This thing moves about the sky, it elevates, it tilts, it rotates. And 100 meters of metal is a pretty serious weight to be doing that stuff with. But still, we want to get bigger. So you end up building things like this. This is the Arecibo telescope, which unfortunately collapsed a couple of years ago. But this is now inside a mountain. This is a 300-meter dish that is put inside a mountain as we keep pushing for the bigger and bigger instruments. And at some point, you realize, well, this is no longer practical. I mean, we filling a mountain with a telescope is one thing, but it's hard to get much bigger than that. So there's this fantastic technique that was invented, which I'm not going to try and go into the mathematics of it here, but we call it aperture synthesis, where by combining the signals from a whole bunch of smaller dishes, and this is the Westerbork synthesis radio telescope, which is again in the northern Netherlands, just actually came to the end of its scientific observing program a couple of months ago, but is again a really important and historical telescope in the field of radio astronomy. And here you have several dishes spread out over a line a couple of kilometers long. And with some clever mathematics, what you can do is you can use that to synthesize a single telescope that's the size of that kind of long dimension. So if this is a couple of kilometers long, you can synthesize a telescope with an angular resolution as if it was a dish a couple of kilometers across. So now we're getting way out ahead of those 25-meter dishes that we started with. But of course, astronomers are never going to settle for that kind of modest scale. Why have a telescope that's a couple of kilometers long when you could have a telescope that's a continent scale telescope? And so over the course of the last couple of decades, ASTRON, together with a bunch of international partners, has been building LOFAR, the low frequency array. And so LOFAR is a continent scale radio telescope. We have receiver elements sort of right across Europe, from Ireland to Latvia, from Sweden to Italy. You get really long, what we call baselines, the maximum distance between these elements. So that gives us really exquisite angular resolution. And this is all centered around a core that is based in the north of the Netherlands. When you actually go and visit one of those receivers, they actually look a bit like this. So again, this doesn't look quite like those big dishes that I was showing you earlier. They really look like kind of a bunch of sticks in a field. And in this case, they look quite pretty because they're all covered with yellow flowers, but that is sadly seasonal. Usually it's just a kind of damp field with a bunch of sticks in it. And what we do here is we have really simple antennae, and we use, again, a clever mathematical technique to, instead of building a single dish that collects the radiation coming from a particular direction and focuses it into a given receiver, we have an array of receivers spread out across the ground, and then we can digitize the signals that each of those antennae receives. And by adding them up with an artificial delay, we can kind of point that array artificially in space. So as you can see in this diagram here, the photons coming from some astronomical source will arrive at the right-hand side of the array a little bit before they arrive at the left-hand side of the array. By artificially compensating for that in software, we can point our telescope wherever we like. And so this gives us a fantastic capability. We've now gone from these complicated pieces of kind of heavy engineering that take up mountains to a bunch of relatively simple dipole antennae stuck in a field, plus a bunch of computers. I mean, we digitize the data that comes off these, and then everything else we do in there is software, computer hardware, networks, etc., which makes it really flexible, and it makes the civil engineering or the mechanical engineering side of the problem much simpler, while of course the software engineering side becomes hard. And so here is very roughly what the sort of data processing and signal processing chain looks like. We have tens of thousands of these antennae spread across Europe in about 50 stations. And when we are sampling from them, we're sampling tens of petabytes per second of data. So this is a really data intensive system, but almost as soon as we start that sampling, we start cutting down that data rate. So the first thing you do is you're inserting these artificial delays and then adding up the data. So immediately you start turning each station of separate antennae into a single synthetic dish. And then we transport the signals from those stations to our so-called correlator. The correlator is the GPU-based system that turns the separate network of stations, it turns them into this big synthesized continent scale radio telescope. And that gives us tens of gigabits per second. We can do some initial processing on that. We can sort of average things down, combine data, and we end up with about 10 petabytes a year of useful data that we then store in our long-term archive. And so that long-term archive, that is spread across the continent with a bunch of international partners. But one of the major centers for that is at SURF. We also work with our collaborators at Jülich and in Poznan, and in fact the catalog system for the LTA is in Groningen. Once we've got that data in the LTA, that's still kind of fairly low-level instrumental data products that, depending on the particular science project that the astronomer is interested in, there's a lot of different things they could do about it. So we work with scientists to facilitate their science processing at a bunch of clusters across Europe. Some of that happens on SPIDER at SURF. And then when that's done, we want to take that reduced science data that actually is not just sort of petabytes of instrument output, but particular scientific results or pictures of astronomical objects, whatever it happens to be, and make that available through public data repositories like the SURF data repository. And so what does that actually produce in terms of science or in terms of output? Well, here are a collection of news stories from February of this year. This was from the recent big data release that we and a bunch of our scientific and data processing partners did at the start of the year. So this is from the LOFAR 2-meter sky survey. We call it LOTS. And as you can see here, I mean, it hit a bunch of different news articles with a new map of the night sky with 4.4 million galaxies, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, the cool thing, I think, from my point of view as a kind of data and science geek is not that it's in the newspapers, but the fact that it's in the SURF data repository. So you can head over to this URL, you can find the LOTS second data release. And this is the result of processing 7.6 petabytes of instrumental data. That corresponds to about 3,500 hours of observing, covering 5,500 square degrees of size of sky. And when we crunch that through all the computers, it ends up being about 150 terabytes of science data, which is basically images of the radio sky. And if you do your measurements on those science images, you can find about 4.4 million radio sources. And then that enables a whole range of different science cases. You can do statistical studies of the night sky based on those 4 million radio sources, or you can do individual studies of particular objects that you're interested in. We make all this data available so the astronomical community can come along and choose which bits of it are interested in, which they can use to address their particular science case. So that's pretty cool, but I promised you that we were going to use a lot more data at SURF, and it was my opening gambit. So what does that look like? Well, the next big thing beyond LOFAR is the SKA. So the SKA is a worldwide partnership to build an even bigger radio telescope. So in fact, there are two separate installations, one in Australia. Australian system looks a bit like a supersized version of LOFAR. And one in South Africa, which is operating at higher frequencies, which means it's actually better for them to use dishes rather than the simple dipole antennae, but many of the principles are about the same. And when this turns on later this decade, it will produce prodigious amounts of data. So in LOFAR terms, I talked about as archiving about 10 petabytes a year. The SKA will archive about 700 petabytes a year. And in order to cope with that, the SKA partners, and I've shown a bunch of the flags here because this really is a truly international project. And what those partners are doing is that we are collaborating to put together this network of what we call regional centers. And so those 700 petabytes a year, rather than trying to store them in any single place, they will go into this globally distributed, federated network of regional centers. And then each regional center is responsible for archiving data and providing services to our scientific community to help them analyze, to process, to understand this enormous deluge of data that is coming out of the back of the SKA telescope. And so we end up with this idea of this globally federated SRC, it's SKA Regional Center Network, where we are now just in the process, literally over the course of the next few weeks, kicking off a bunch of prototypes. I mean, the technical challenges in making this work are pretty substantial. But by working together with international partners really around the world, all of who are putting together their own parts of this SRC network, we hope we can build a system that will enable the scientific community worldwide to make the best of the SKA instrument, not just in the short term, but we're hoping this is a legacy system that is then be running for decades to come. And so ASTRON and SURF are collaborating on this. We are representing the Netherlands in this giant construction effort, with a particular view to kind of making sure that the needs of astronomers across the Dutch universities in particular are well represented, and they get the services they need out of this SRC network. So at that point, with a hint that that's what's coming over the next few years, I'm going to finish up with my sort of final pitch, which is that just like Henne, we are also recruiting. If you would like to come and help us build this SRC network dealing with hundreds of petabytes of data and building some legacy services for astronomers over decades to come, please hit this URL. We are advertising for software developers and a bunch of other positions, and we'd love to hear from you. And I've also put in here some URLs to various other facilities that I've mentioned, or places that you can explore some of the data products that I've talked about over the last few minutes. So at that point, I will stop talking and I will be happy to take questions.
Yes, John, thank you. So the audience can choose working for your project or Henne's project. And we have 1 minute left, so I'll have to check if there are any questions. Yeah, Raymond has one. Energy and sustainability are important topics in society and modern science, especially for big data experiments. What are ASTRON and the SCA doing? Doing in this regard, and what do you expect from IT infrastructure such as SURF? And we also have some vacancies at SURF, by the way.
That's a really great question, and in fact, it's a very hot topic in the SKA in particular. I mean, so the energy that is required to run some of these observing facilities, and in particular the kind of in telescope processing as well as the processing that will happen at surface, they're really big facilities that need a lot of energy. One of the advantages to the locations in which they are being built is that there is access to abundant solar power, and so in particular in the Australian parts of the SKA, enormous amounts of effort are being put in to solar generation and how we can use that to make the telescope as energy effective as possible. And being built in the kind of Australian desert has a huge benefit for this. I find the question directly as it kind of applies to computing in the Netherlands is perhaps a little bit harder to answer. We would love to see. I mean, I think it would be important to us all as individuals and to the wider community that we live in to see SURF and ASTRON pushing that as we're building these big facilities, we're building them in a sustainable and energy effective way. Because there's no point having hundreds of petabytes of data if we are kind of scorched the planet together.
Yeah, okay. Well, we've run out of time, John, so thank you very much. And then we're at the end of this session. Yes, thank you, Henne and John. And for our audience, you can stay tuned. Maybe you'll join our next session at 3 o'clock. So have a good day all, and maybe we see each other soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.